have passed a motion to explore the decriminalisation of drugs in WA at their state conference held over the weekend. We heard from Esperance Branch President of the Nationals, Tory Castledine, on Friday about why the motion was brought forth and what they hope to achieve with it. Here it is in summary.
Everyone in the branch knows someone that's been affected by drug use, whether it's an employee or a family member or a friend. We've all seen it firsthand and seen the damage that it's doing. And we don't think that the current system's working. So we just want to investigate alternatives, one of which is the decriminalisation of drugs, which doesn't mean that it suddenly becomes legal to use all drugs, but that it's dealt with through the health system. And it's a model that's been working very successfully in Portugal, and we think it's worth having a look into seeing if it's something we can replicate here.
How confident are you that Portugal and WA would be aligned and that if a similar policy was introduced, similar results would occur?
Well, and that's exactly why we're calling for an inquiry, because we don't know. We don't know whether it's something that is feasible here or not, but we think it's worth looking into and seeing a successful model and seeing if we can change it, make it suit WA and replicate it to work here. So that's exactly why we're calling for an inquiry into it, not just saying let's introduce it right away.
Tory Castledine, Esperance Branch President for the WA Nationals. So the motion was passed for the WA Nationals to call on the government to initiate an inquiry into the decriminalisation of drug use and transferring administration from the criminal system to the health system. We did contact the Office of the Premier, Mark McGowan, to ask for a response. They did decline to comment, but pointed us towards statements made in the recent past over the issue of drugs, such as in May of this year when the Premier, Mark McGowan, said, "We're not going to decriminalise drugs in West Australia, full stop." While the Nationals don't appear to have the support from the Premier, there is an increasing number of countries around the world who have also cited the example of Portugal as a catalyst for some change in the fight against drugs. Dr. Stephen Bright is a senior lecturer in addiction at Edith Cowan University. Hello to you, Stephen.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your time. Now, can you describe in essence the Portugal style of dealing with drugs and drug offenders in a nutshell?
So in a nutshell, what they have done is decriminalise the use for small quantities. And so they've diverted the money that would be spent on law enforcement into health services. And consequently, if you're caught with a small amount of drugs, you're encouraged to attend a dissuasion committee, and if they determine that you require treatment, they put that money that they've saved from prosecuting people with small quantities of drugs into those treatment centres. In fact, Portugal spends the same amount on drugs as Australia does relative to GDP. So the amount being spent is the same. The difference is the way we spend our money. The Australian government currently spends over $1 billion each year on law enforcement, yet the availability of drugs continues to increase and the prices decrease.
Carry on.
So I was just going to say that this approach in terms of how you split the spending of the money is what's important. So Australia spends 66% of its money on law enforcement, and this does not seem to be working. So by putting that money into the healthcare system, which is what Portugal did, it assists people enter treatment, it reduces the stigma associated with accessing treatment services, and what they've seen is a significant decrease in drug use, particularly among young people, an increase in people entering treatment, a decrease in drug-related deaths, a decrease in HIV and other health-related problems, a decrease in crime.
And can I just stop you there? Can I ask you the question which I asked Tory Castledine? Can it be replicated in WA? Is it as simple as saying, well, it's worked there, it would work in WA? Is anyone able to answer that question with authority?
Absolutely not, because Portugal really was an experiment, and if you look at what led to the inception of the policy being implemented, they had a heroin crisis. In 1999, Portugal had the highest rate of heroin use in Europe. It now has the lowest rate, or one of the lowest rates of heroin use and use of other drugs in Europe. But it was that impetus that led to the implementation of such a unique policy.
So at the moment in WA, we've got a different impetus, which is around meth. So how do we know whether it would work?
The only way to find out really whether it would would work is to trial the implementation of such a system and evaluate it. And if it demonstrates similar benefits, then continue with it. Often in drug policy, that's what we do. If we look at the Sydney injecting room, that was only a trial centre for 10 years, but now it's become a permanent part of Australian health policy. So there is a need to think outside of the square. I agree with the sentiments of the National Party spokesperson. What we are doing is not working. We need to think outside the box. And here is an example of thinking outside of the box. You mentioned a lot of other countries sort of looking at similar approaches. In fact, countries like the US have probably taken it even further in some states where they're looking at some of the drugs like cannabis and providing regulated use, which is leading to decreases in opiate-related deaths. It's led to decreased motor vehicle deaths, though funnily enough an increase in motor vehicle accidents. But more importantly, it's created a significant increase in terms of the state coffers because they're heavily taxing the market, and in some states it's in the law that money has to go back into education and health. It's
an interesting topic to discuss, so we appreciate your time, Stephen.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Stephen Bright, Senior Lecturer in Addiction at Edith Cowan University. On the text, this from Anonymous. Legalised drugs and the bikies have less to sell. Look what the TAB did to SP bookies. Matt says, Andrew, why should junkies get free needles and fit packs when people who have diabetes don't? Everybody has a choice in life. People who are diagnosed with diabetes and other illnesses get the raw deal. They didn't choose that path. Junkies do. This from Les Ingero. Andrew, I despair. We legalise the criminal junkie and tax law-abiding workers who smoke. There's never been a cigarette-induced murder or robbery. Not that I know of, says Les. 0448 922 604 is the text line.